It all started, as I recall, when a Jehovah's Witness, younger than me, started coming to my door. The year was something like 2002. Normally I'm not particularly interested in any door-to-door salesmen or religion pushers, but for some reason, musings on the universe and the meaning of life might have appealed to me. He brought me some Awake magazines he had found that dealt with these topics. In my personal life, I had experienced a crisis of some kind in my relationship, which had ended, and I was stressed by my difficult studies in university. The completion of those studies had consumed a huge amount of energy. It was at this very moment that this young man happened to come to my door. And sure enough, one day I invited him in. I made us some coffee and asked him to explain why he had been to my door a few times. The Bible study was well managed from the start. He brought up the book, Knowledge That Leads to Everlasting Life, and Chapter 6, Why Do We Grow Old and Die, was the one that interested me the most from the table of contents. I remember how the front and back pages of this book depicted a paradise, with animals and people in a utopian landscape of great beauty. Even the colors in those pictures seemed completely overwhelming, which is why I felt for a long time that it was really childish to think that some people actually believed that that would one day be a reality. If I had known then all that I know now about the history, the teachings and the practices of this whole organization, I would have been much more critical of with my studying. It is very likely, even inevitable, that I would never have joined this religion, which is run in an authoritarian way from the United States of America. But on the other hand, maybe it was meant to be. The 16 years I spent, 10 of which I served as an elder and about 5 as a pioneer, gave me a pretty good experience of the kind of organization I was dealing with. And although I had to leave because of many doctrinal conflicts and unbiblical teachings, everything I experienced and learned was by no means all bad. Among the good things I can mention the good wife I found through this organization. The field service increased my humility and broadened me as a person. And the diligent study that has enabled me to find God and know how to approach spiritual matters in a rational way, and to systematically discover profound truths from the Bible. But back to the beginning. As I've always had a fear of people, we went to the Kingdom Hall for the first time when there was no meeting, to see an empty hall. The second time, the hall was full of people when I went to the first meeting. And oh, the hustle and bustle and amazement. Everyone came up to introduce themselves, smiled beautifully and were overwhelmingly interested in me. It was a very strange feeling. I was sure they were all pretending. But from the beginning I started attending meetings very regularly. At that time there were 3 meetings a week, 1 book study in a private home. I remember that at that time we were studying the book of Isaiah and everything it dealt with seemed to me to be totally incomprehensible and sublime. The same was true of the Watchtower articles that were examined in the meetings. But after a while, I started to get a sense of what it was all about. I remember how distressing it was to think that these meetings would go on and on and on, indefinitely. Usually, even going to school always ends at some point, but these meetings were going to continue into the new system and forever after that. I started attending in field service very quickly. I was an unbaptized publisher for about a year before I was baptized in 2004. I wondered why only 10 hours was such a standard requirement. I thought this work should have been done much more. I started pioneering about as soon as I could and quickly progressed to the position of ministerial servant. I also found a wife in the organization pretty quickly and I was also appointed an elder in 2010. That's when the trouble really started. I badly injured my back at work, and first they found a bad prolapse, a rupture of the intervertebral disc in the lower back. Later, the MRI scans showed 2 smaller herniated discs in the thoracic spine. As a result, I was in constant nerve pain for many years, unable to sit up. In the mornings I ate my cereal lying on the floor. Meetings and conventions were a pain when you couldn't sit down. So you had to stand or walk all the time. The car journeys to and from conventions were painful, and after only half an hour of sitting my leg was completely numb. Over time, this pain ate up so much energy that I developed severe depression. But I was still able to work, even though I was in pain. At this point, moving to a small town and changing the congregation became necessary. We moved to a small town where there was a lot of work in the congregation and not many elders. Friends considered this to be a blessing from Jehovah. For a while I was able to be a pioneer in the new congregation, but then I had to stop because I couldn't reach the needed hours. It was very difficult to get a job in a small village. That's why I tried to be self-employed for about a year. But I got totally tired of work and congregational duties. I also had to be hospitalized twice because of my burnout at work and severe depression. I had what I call a forced stop. At first I thought it would be a sick leave for a week or two, but it ended up being 2 years. Recovery from burnout and severe depression is very slow because the central nervous system is so overloaded. In the summer of 2018 there was a week-long elders course in Pori, Finland, which we attended with another brother. He had rented a cottage in 𝙀𝙬𝙅𝙏, Pori, where we had a sauna and spent time studying at the end of our course days. I remember sitting on the porch of the cottage after the sauna and watching the sea. While sitting there, I prayed to Jehovah. I will remember that prayer for the rest of my life. For almost a week I had listened in amazement to the profound answers the brothers gave there on the course. I felt I was completely at rock bottom and somehow completely out of touch with everything. I had nothing to give to anyone. I remember giving exactly one answer during the whole week, even though usually my head is full of ideas and thoughts on spiritual matters. I prayed to Jehovah. You know my situation. Please help me to see what would be the most important thing to investigate so that I can regain my spirituality. Some weeks went by. Then one day I received a call from a friend with a Pentecostal background who had begun to study the name of God. He started talking a lot about how some Hebrew-speaking Jews have been explaining on YouTube videos that God's name is Jehovah. He detailed how Hebrew manuscripts prove this point. This friend and his wife, who had both been absolutely certain that God's name was Yahweh, had become convinced that it was Jehovah after all. They had even started to use this name in their prayers, even though it sounded very strange to them. So there I was, listening to my friend, thinking to myself that I should talk to him about Jehovah. And now a Pentecostal calls me up and starts witnessing about the name of Jehovah, even though I am a Jehovah's Witness. This is not the way it should be. And that started my nearly 2 years of Hebrew study on this name issue. And I prayed constantly because it seemed so difficult. Until finally I found out that the name really is Jehovah after all. Excited about this, I tried to explain it to many people in the congregation, but they didn't seem to understand what was so special about it. One brother said that Yahweh and Jehovah are both correct and equally good names. I could clearly see that this was not deeply understood, even among the Jehovah's Witnesses. No one could explain what was meant by the imperfective causative mentioned in the Insight book when it speaks about the meaning of God's name. So I did a study on the topic, which I sent to friends via WhatsApp as a PDF file. In the study, I pointed out that according to the available Hebrew manuscripts, the form Jehovah is correct. The form Jehovah is not based solely on the writings of the 13th century Spanish monk, Raymundus Martin, as stated in the book, Aid to Bible Understanding, page 885. In my study, I point out in detail that the name Yahweh is not based at all on the Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible, which are from earlier time than the 1200s. The organization also got the meaning of the name wrong. It cannot be an imperfective causative, because the verb in question does not fold into such a verb in the Hebrew verb system in that way. This study later proved to be the basis for my disfellowshipping. And although I sent the letter of dissociation myself, they found it ineligible. According to protocol, the letter of dissociation must be signed and dated. I handwrote my letter on paper, took a photo of it and posted it on the congregation's WhatsApp group, and also privately to everyone whose contact details I had. Still, they wanted to disfellowship me for apostasy. The reason was for spreading unbiblical teachings. So for a while I had the opportunity to witness about Jehovah to other Jehovah's Witnesses, but no one was really interested in the name of Jehovah in any depth. The name of Jehovah, which should be the most important thing for witnesses. At the same time, I noticed a detail that even though there is a lot of material on that name in the literature of the organization, yet there is not one talk outline that deals with the name of Jehovah in depth. Frustrated by this and deeply disappointed by the reaction of friends, I turned to a longtime Finnish EXJW activist, 𝙀𝙓𝙅𝙏𝙄𝙎, and asked if he would publish my research. He agreed. I did so because if and when the organization ever sheds new light on this name issue, they will be deeply humbled by the fact that this understanding has been available on an apostate website for a long time. 1914 was always a difficult subject for me to explain in the field service. I had a Bible study with a friend and tried very hard to explain it with the help of a book called Reasoning with the Scriptures, but the friend didn't understand the explanation. And to be honest, neither did I completely. After waking up to the fact that not everything in the teachings of the organization is 100% correct, I started to really study this 1914 teaching. For example, I looked at the appendix of the book, What Does the Bible Really Teach? 1914, a significant year in Bible prophecy. Nothing in the picture in the appendix is correct. Everything falls apart. I was shocked and amused at the same time. I made YouTube videos on this subject, which can be found on this channel. So when 1914 falls, many other teachings fall with it, a whole cluster of teachings, you might say. For example, the teachings on the first resurrection, the invisible presence of Jesus, the last days, this overlapping generation and the governing body, they all fall helplessly because they are based in one way or another on this year. I had everything in order, so to speak, in the organization. But the whole house of cards fell apart with these dogmas. The reason I left the organization and started my activist career as an apostate is purely doctrinal. I have never had anything bad to say about any individual person within the organization. I liked the field service. And in my own way I still do, but this time I don't have to report anything to anyone. I am still a firm believer in Jehovah, Jesus and the Bible. So I am not even an apostate in the sense that my brothers and sisters think I am, because I have not given up my faith. When COVID-19 starts to subside and the witnessing carts start to appear on the streets again, I will gladly go and witness them about Jehovah, because I know they still have a lot to learn. Thanks for watching.